Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Gabriel de Guzman, Director of Arts and Chief Curator at Waves Hill. And we're so pleased to welcome you. Thank you for joining us for this artist talk with exhibiting artists Claudia Campazzo, Asuka Hishiki, Faye Van Wert, and moderated by John Pastoriza-Pinol. This program is presented in conjunction with the American Society of Botanical Artists 25th Annual International, which is currently on view at Wave Hill. The exhibition celebrates the enduring appeal of nature as a subject for artists. There's an outstanding selection of 46 artworks, meticulously rendered paintings and drawings of a variety of plant specimens. And Wave Hill is really pleased to partner with ASBA on this wonderful exhibition. Before we begin, I'd like to do an accessibility check. Today, we have a few options for participation. You can ask a question using the chat function or the Q&A function. You'll find that at the bottom of the screen. For those dialing in, if you want to ask a question, you can email visualarts@wavehill.org. I'm going to put that in the chat just so that you have it. Visual Arts, wavehill.org. And let's see. We may answer questions either during the conversation or toward the end of the program. I want to inform you that this program is being recorded, but the audience will not appear in the recording. We are not providing ASL interpretation, but are using closed captioning through Zoom. To start the closed captions, please press the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And I'm also going to paste in some shortcuts into the chat. So there are some shortcuts that you can use as well. So I am very pleased to welcome our panelists. Through the magic of Zoom or sugar plum fairies or something, we are conducting this program over 4 continents. So it's very exciting. We have Claudia Campazzo in Chile, South America, Asuka Hishiki in Hyogo Prefecture, Japan, and Faye Van Wert in Lexington, Massachusetts in the US. And botanical artist and educator John Pastoriza-Pinol is zooming in from Melbourne, Australia. And I and my colleagues are here in New York City, in the US. I would just like to, let's see. I would just like to mention also that John was one of the 3 jurors who selected the works for the exhibition. The other jurors were Karen Kluglein, botanical artist and educator, and Eileen Jeng Lynch, former Wave Hill curator of visual arts, and now the Bronx Museum's director of curatorial programs. To give you a quick rundown of today's program, I'm going to introduce John shortly, and then he will introduce each of the artists and lead a conversation with them. We will also present images from the show using the share screen function. After the discussion, we'll give the audience a chance to ask questions, but you can feel free to type your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to them. Now I'd like to introduce John Pastoriza-Pinol, who is a contemporary artist working in the mode of botanical painting. His practice often departs from the discipline of naturalism and investigates the complex and dynamic interrelationships between man and nature and science and art. Pastoriza-Pinol is a recipient of ASBA's 2013 Diane Bouchier Award for Excellence in Botanical Art and the 2005 RHS Gold Medal winner. His work is held in public and private collections around the world, including the National Gallery of Victoria, South Bank, Australia, Art Gallery of Ballarat in Ballarat, Central Australia, the Hunt Institute, Durham, North Carolina, Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, United Kingdom, Royal Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, Australia, RMIT University, Melbourne, Australia, and the collection of Elisa and Isaac M. Sutton. Pastoriza-Pinol's work is included in both the Highgrove Florilegium and Transylvania Florilegium, which are projects created under the aegis of the Prince of Wales Charitable Foundation. He is currently represented by Scott Livesey Galleries in Australia, where he recently had a solo exhibition titled Botanicum Series 2. Welcome, John. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for today's conversation. We really appreciate you lending your expertise to this event.
It's an absolute honor. Good evening, everyone, and good morning, everyone in the Southern Hemisphere. It really is a wonderful opportunity to be able to present this seminar and chat with artists today. I've had the unenviable task of having to select certain artists who I would like to explore further their art, and it's certainly no disrespect or any disparaging kind of like outcome from the other artists in the show currently on display at Wave Hill. I think all the work in the show is absolutely amazing. That's why we chose it. So before I start going in and delving deeper with our artists, I'd like to introduce our three artists here today. Our first is Claudia Campazzo. Claudia trained as a classical violinist and had a musical career performing and teaching in New England. After a period of progressive hearing loss, she became profoundly deaf in 2016. Soon after, looking for a creative outlet, she enrolled in a watercolor class and hasn't stopped making art since. Campazzo's work has been selected for the ASBA Annual International Exhibition in 2019, 2020, and 2022, and has been part of many group shows in California. She's recently returned to native Chile after more than 30 years of living in the United States, and is currently studying classical art at the Sadi Valeri Atelier. Welcome, Claudia.
Thank you.
Our next artist is Faye Van Wert. Faye Van Wert began watercolor painting at Wellesley College Botanic Gardens in 2013. Her work has been exhibited at the Brush Gallery, Boston, and Newport Flower Shows in 2016 and 2017, the Filoli Botanical Art Exhibitions, as well as the 2016 Beauty Botanical Show at the OA Gallery, and 2018, 2019, and 2022, ASBA Annual International Exhibitions. Van Wert received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Michigan and a Bachelor of Fine Arts in illustration from the Massachusetts College of Art, and a Master of Arts from Simmons College. She wrote and illustrated Empty Pockets in 2000. It's illustrated children and has illustrated children's magazines and worked in pottery and silkscreen design. Faye Van Wert lives in Lexington, Massachusetts. And last but not least is Asuka Hishiki. The work of Asuka Hishiki ranges from drawings of rare and endangered plants to familiar vegetables found in the home, vividly painted in astonishing detail. For the past decade, her work has addressed environmental issues and survival of the natural world, including large-scale installations of the migration patterns of monarch butterflies in recycled paper. Hishiki has also participated in residencies at botanical gardens around the world as part of a decades-long cross-institutional effort to produce a vast florilegium of contemporary botanical documentations. Born in Kyoto, Japan, Hishiki lives in the Hyogo Prefecture of Japan. She received a Master's of Fine Art in Painting from the Kyoto City University of Arts. Hishiki's work is in public collections, including the Huntington in San Marino, California, the Denver Botanic Gardens in Denver, Colorado, the National Tropic Botanic Gardens in Kaloa, Hawaii, the New York State Museum in Albany, New York, the Hunt Institute for Botanical Documentation, Pittsburgh, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Kew Gardens in Richmond in the US, and she's also in the prestigious Shirley Sherwood collection, also held in the UK. So I'd like to welcome both Faye and Asuka. So let's deep dive. So one of the things I like to ask a lot of botanical artists is, tell me, what is it about your art practice, and when did you begin your art career, and what aspects did you admire that got you interested into botanic art? So I might open it up. Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Okay, Faye, off you go.
Thank you.
I started painting at Wellesley College of Art, Wellesley Botanical Art program. About 10 years ago, a friend invited me to take a watercolor class with her, and I hadn't really picked up a brush in more than 20 years while I was teaching English as a second language. So when I walked into class, I was a little bit nervous until I found out that everybody in the class either loved flowers, grew flowers, photographed flowers, and now they were painting flowers. So I said, these are my people, I'm here. I love it. And so I am very happily working in my studio in the basement. But did you ask about materials? I can't remember what you said.
Not yet, no. How about you, Claudia? How did you become attracted to botanic art? What was the pull for you?
Well, I actually, I feel like I have a very strong connection with nature. I spent every summer of my childhood in southern Chile in a little cabin by a lake. And that's, I always feel like that's my spiritual home. I'm actually heading there on Thursday. I'm very excited. And I've always been very outdoorsy. So when I started creating art, like you said in the introduction, I kind of stumbled upon it. It didn't, I never thought it would be something that I would exhibit my drawings or my paintings. But when I started doing it, it was very natural for me to want to draw nature. And that's what speaks to me. And that's what I connect with. So it's a very natural fit. I didn't know that botanical art existed. I was just painting twigs. I was painting rocks. I was painting flowers. And then, through the magic of the internet, I started doing research, and I was like, wow, there's a thing called botanical art. This is perfect. This is great. Now, having said that, I don't define myself as a botanical artist because I feel like I want to paint and draw anything that catches my attention. I don't want to limit myself. However, having said that, I end up very often drawing nature,
Yeah, wonderful, fantastic. And how about you, Asuka?
I was drawing and making stuff since I was small, and I was also a bit of the collector, collecting some small acorns or some small things on the ground. And then I went art school, and in the art school, I was making a huge abstract painting, but on the side, I was always making the nature drawings. So I don't remember, but at one point it just sort of flipped, and I started to paint more on nature, making portrait. And then I still love doing some abstract art as well. And right now it's so busy to making some and the painting because the plants make me so busy. But yeah, so I couldn't find a starting point because it's so gradually, like, the moving and the shifting. So, but
it's interesting. A lot of artists who do categorize themselves in the camp of botanical art always say that they've had that exposure to plants or gardening as a child, and it's at that point which is so critical to try and get people to be curious and to know more. So yeah, it's really interesting to see there's 3 different stories happening here in terms of how you've come to this point in time. Well, another question that we always like asking fellow artists is the medium and what type of materials that you like to use. So we'll start with Faye. What predominantly materials do you use in your art form?
I paint on Fabriano Artistico paper, it's 300 hot press. And my palette has a mix of paints. It's primarily Daniel Smith, Winsor Newton, and Schmincke transparent. Here it is. It's kind of a mess. And for my washes, I use generally a number 4 brush. I have an Isabe and also a Raphael brush that I use. But for fine dry brush work, I use a 007, Series 7, and it's a Winsor Newton Series 7 00. So this is it. And I have this interesting little rubber tip on it, but that comes from another brush that I use that I call my scrubby brush. And it has a flat tip. It also comes in a chisel tip, and you can find this very cheaply at a store called Michael's Crafts in the US. This is called the number 2 Royal. But the best thing about it is that little rubber tip. And when your brush goes bad, you just slide the tip off and you can put it on your other brushes.
Wow.
I also use some masking fluid for keeping the highlights, and it's PBO. I always store it upside down. It has the blue tint. And I have a nib pen that is Hunt's 512 tip. And it's great holder, which is Koh-i-Noor from Germany, and it has a really great grip with the cork on the end. And then finally, in order to preserve the lights of my, like the petals of the iris and also the petals of the pond lily and some of the leaves, I do an underpainting of some Chinese white, which is the Winsor Newton Chinese white. Thank you, Asuka, for that wonderful technique that I learned from you.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Thanks, Faye. How about you, Claudia?
I for my graphite drawings, I use this Stadler, they're called Mars Lumograph pencils, and they're the blue one with the black end. And I sharpen them super, like I take a lot of wood out of the tip.
It looks like a weapon, yeah.
Yeah, they're dangerous. Like, you know, if you can draw blood, then they're good and sharp enough. And yeah, I sharpen them with this nitrum. They're like sandpaper on a board. It's really nice. And I do that so that you can sharpen them super, super sharp.
Sharp, yeah. Wow.
And then
do you hover in like the what we call the hard or the soft pencils? Do you go to the H's or B's, or do you like mixing it up?
I use like a really wide range. So for the darkest darks, I use probably a 4B or so, and then I go all the way to an 8H. And
wow.
Everything. Yeah. So the 8H, you barely can see the mark on the paper. You're like not sure. You're like, you know, is
anything coming off? Yeah.
Yeah, and I draw on Bristol board, and you know, the very, very smooth surface paper. So yeah, that's it. It's kind of streamlined set of materials.
Fantastic. So there's an amazing manufacturer called Mitsubishi. We know them as a car manufacturer, but they also do pencils, and you can get a 10H pencil. Yeah, I know. Nothing comes off.
Right? How do you sharpen? It must be so hard that you can barely.
Yeah. It's just ceramic. There's no graphite left. So. And lastly, Asuka. Now, Asuka, you have lots of great techniques, and you've shared them with many artists around the world. But you know, what do you primarily use? What are your chosen tools?
I use watercolor on paper, and I should have prepared more. I didn't bring anything here. I thought I just gonna explain. I say, like, you know, the watercolor on paper. I started to use the color pencil a little bit and the mixing. Yeah, that's simple. And the paper is the arches, the hot plus, and and then if something I can share might be something a little strange, but here I kept a lot of dead insects. These are like because I feel so sorry for insects to catch while they are alive. So I pick up some dead insect and then putting in a box, and I have a lot of collections.
A lot
And
of
then when
insects.
I want to paint, I just pick up one and
It's like you live in a Wunderkammer. Now, I know that you also have a really cool little brush, tiny little
yeah.
brush. Yeah.
It's thank you. It's a Japanese synthetic, the brush called Intalum. And it's really tiny, and the brush, and and it's you can draw a line much thinner than hair.
Wow.
And I try to draw a lines like the 7 lines in 1 millimeter wide. But I couldn't do 7 lines because it was a legend, Makino Tomitaro, he did that, but I couldn't do, I just have a 5 or 6 lines in it, so.
Very disappointing, yeah.
John?
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat for Asuka that's kind of related to materials. It's someone, Sarah, is asking, Asuka, do you do sumie? Does that make sense?
Oh, no, I don't do sumie, or that's the Japanese calligraphic painting. I would love to try, but you have to have so much training on it, because, yeah. I will try one day.
You'll be good at it. Now, another question that we get asked a lot is that how would we explain botanical art to a wider art audience? So, because I know that when we think about where we sit in the milieu of art practice that is currently happening around the world, a lot of people think, where does botanical art sit? Does it sit in the contemporary fine art? Can it move into just contemporary art, or is it considered just craft? So I'm going to open that up for discussion. So Faye, how would you describe what you do to a wider audience?
Oh, well, what I do you mean to talk about the pond lily? Or
no, to talk about in general why you choose to do this incredible descriptive painting, and why is it so important in art? Yeah.
Well, it's the love of the craft. It really is a challenge to me to really find a subject matter that speaks to me. I paint very slowly, so I work from photographs primarily and any research that I can do. But it's really important to me to represent a plant particularly well to show its growing habits, also the color and the details and the texture. Like Claudia's Danger, the texture on that, I was sure I was going to cut my finger before I could turn the page. It was great. And the other part, I feel very strongly it should have movement or some element of surprise.
Yes.
And Asuka's tomato was just wonderful, because there I was studying that little rotten dried bit in the middle. And as my eye went across, there was her praying mantis that popped out at me. I loved it.
Yeah. Fantastic. How about you, Claudia? How would you talk about your art, I guess, to the local art community in Chile? I mean, obviously there's quite a lot of different art forms that are currently available to be viewed and experienced. How would you explain to a wider group of people about the importance of what you do?
Yeah, I like how you're framing that, because you're actually asking me what I do. And that to me is essential to explaining art of any kind. Is something that you do, is not an end product. So, well, there is an end product. The real art making happens while you're doing it. And I think for me, working on a botanical painting or drawing, I become very attached to my subject. And this relationship I develop with the plant is really special because I am relating to a non-human. There is a communication between two species. And I hope that the viewer that sees my drawing or my painting will be able to understand that, because it's so important right now that we understand that we share this world with non-humans, with many other beings. And it's a really good reminder that we need to get out of this sort of human-centric way of understanding the world.
Yes.
And the plants give us an opportunity to kind of reframe ourselves and maybe imagine a world that is a little bit kinder. And I find that really beautiful. So I hope that in addition to someone finding the painting or the drawing beautiful, they will see beyond that.
Yes, yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And how about you, Asuka?
My case, I simply don't, I don't try, or I don't challenge explaining or describing, because I think my word is really poor, and I tried before in the past, but ended up misleading or misunderstanding. And also explaining, describing, I think the other people does much better job. And as a painter or creator, I feel like it is not my job. And I was so busy just seeing like Claudia said, seeing something in front of you and appreciation or excitement about the plants and the nature. And that almost fill up my time and my, the passion or my energy. So, and instead of describing or explaining, I talk about what I care, what I felt, and that makes more productive conversation between, any viewer or any people who see my work.
So going on from that, I know that when we come across your larger body of work, and it is incredibly diverse, but there's a constant theme that comes through, and that is of the tomato. And I have been admiring your tomatoes for years and years and years and years. And at one stage there was one available and I was too late. It had already gone. So what is it about the tomato that you gravitate to? What is it? What is the story behind that? What's that narrative that we like to explore?
It's actually really simple. I just fell in love with it. The first time I saw the tomato was 20 years ago in the New York City farmers market. So it was so weird looking tomato. I thought it was some misshapen or like a rotten tomato because color was almost a little blacky, some, strange twisted. But it's like a love, and you couldn't find any reason. You don't need any reason for it. It's just so intrigued. I was so intrigued by the tomatoes and like a love. Some people might hate like a big scar on it or some strange color or the even rotten, the shaggy skin or really bad rotten smell. But once you fell in love with it, you feel attractive to it. Even that bad side is so precious.
So it's obviously the shape, the constructions, the imperfections that are still beautiful to you. Is that correct? Yeah. I think we have another image of another tomato work, and this one was part of a larger series of work, and we were really fortunate to have this particular piece in the entire collection at a show here in Victoria. And it was a wonderful story, because it was this concept of a memento mori. So going back to that tradition of the vanitas theme that we see in the Dutch still life. What was the story behind this one? Because I know that you love to introduce a pollinator or an insect. Tell us more about this one.
If sorry. I started to grow my own tomato in my backyard since I moved back to Japan. And once you start growing a tomato, you see more insects visiting the tomato plants. Sometimes it's really obvious because the leaf munching some and the worms, but sometimes it's not obvious what a lot of wasps coming or some more plain mantis coming. And then the first I didn't realize why I have so much and the insect around the tomato plants, but one day I realized those insects are after the worm. They were hunting for them. I'm seeing just a tomato at the first, but I realized so many different elements are connected to the tomato. Like to have the fruits, we need a lot of pollinator, like you that the pollinator coming, and also the tomato. How can I say? With the tomato, the nature are connecting, and then we. Sorry. Thanks to those the relationship between the creatures or plants, and even though we were portraying one plant, but I feel like I'm just knocking at one door and seeing much more wilder, and a wider world. So nature is such a deep layer and like a thick carpet, even though we were seeing on the surface, but if you were digging in, you see so deep and seeing so many different species and connecting each other. And since we were taking such a long time to paint one plant, I feel like I'm connecting, even though I didn't portray everything. Like something in the dirt of the tomato plants, or some other unknown birds coming to picking some tomato, or the worms. So I'm feeling it. So the tomato, it's just one fruit, but it gave me so much the bigger world, and I tried to. Yeah,
I can't wait to see a bigger painting of yours, and it has everything that's interconnected. So you'll have the tomato in the center, and then you have everything associated with it, and you'll be in the corner painting that little portrait. Fantastic. So, Claudia, I want to have a chat to you about your amazing piece, because I remember when we were going through and doing the selection of works. This one certainly piqued the interest of all of the judging panel. And what I loved about it is that it tapped into what I see as geometric abstraction. And I love it when we can actually push that boundary of natural history art and move it into a place where it can be appreciated by people who like all wider art forms. So this particular work, which is the Echinopsis chiloensis, tell us a little bit more about why it was this part of the plant that you decided to capture.
Yeah, so I was coming off a period of drawing casts. Those are plaster reproductions of sculptures of the figure. And I had spent, I don't know, maybe 6 months just drawing casts in my studio. And I was really missing doing a botanical piece. So I actually was working at the time with Elaine Searle. She was mentoring me, and she and I discussed the idea of doing a botanical piece that had a sculptural nature. So I went to the UC Berkeley Botanical Garden looking for something that, you know, where I could apply the skills I had been practicing by drawing the human figure, the cast. And I also wanted to zoom in something, like really zoom in as much as made sense, right? And I found that this cactus just completely fit the bill. Like when I saw this, I actually saw torsos and legs and belly. And I was like, okay, this is it. So it was super fun drawing it. It was a great. It took me a long time. It's small. It's 8 by 8, but yeah, it was definitely a really fun project for me.
Yeah, it's amazing how we as artists have that ability to anthropomorphize natural forms and how we can instantly relate them back to the human form. And it's really interesting you talk about, you can see limbs and legs and possibly something else in there, but it's really interesting that that narrative can be explored further. What I really love about this is that you have these really tricky parts of the plant, which is that sense of foreshortening. How did you get those thorns to look the way they do? Because foreshortening thorns is probably one of the hardest things to do.
You know, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question. I can tell you that when I did the initial drawing, I did what's called straight line blocking, which is you draw everything with straight lines. You don't do any curves, and it's kind of a very free way to draw, and it's also very accurate. It takes a while to get the hang of it, but once you have it, it's a very accurate way to draw. So I think the end result really shows. And the foreshortening doesn't become like an extra thing. It's just part of, you know, what you're seeing and what you're blocking. And it just came about pretty, you know, there was a lot of flow. I wasn't really thinking about it.
Yeah. Fantastic, it's stunning. Do we have another one of Claudia's works, Cecilia? Or yeah, this is great. So obviously, you mentioned that there's things that attract you in terms of shape and form. So we're moving slightly away from natural history, but into more man-made elements. But tell us a little about this particular one, because this is great. You can see so much color in this monochromatic work, and it's amazing that you can achieve that, especially in the folds of the fabric. Do you find that these are great ways to then learn certain skills to then come back and do more complicated natural forms?
Absolutely, and that's why I wanted to share this piece, because I wanted to talk about how these boundaries that we put on ourselves are really just sometimes, not always, but sometimes sort of jails that we create for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that if you really look at form, you can see the shapes of the cactus emulating the shape of the human body and the shapes of a drapery and the folds. And it's really all the same. It's just light falling on a surface that is curving. And sort of for me, the message behind that, not only that, yay, if I can do one thing, I can probably do another, and that's fun, but it's also, you know, we are all so interconnected. This is all just one continuous thing. So if we can open up to that, the creative landscape for me opens up, and that's really beautiful.
Fantastic, wonderful. And I want to come on to have a look at Faye's work now, because this was one of my favorites. I really gravitated to this because of the composition. And after meeting with you prior to our conversation today, I've seen two, but I didn't realize this is not a diptych, it was a triptych. There were 3 studies associated with this particular work. So this is the Nympha variegata, or the yellow pond lily, as well as some of the other associated plants. And another thing I need to confess is that Wave Hill had shared a post on Instagram. We got to have a look at the paintings in situ, and I was surprised at the size. I actually thought this was a much bigger work. In fact, it's quite intimate, and it's an absolute credit to you. So could you tell us a little bit more about the way that you've decided to enlarge certain elements and then bring things in?
When I did these pieces, I wanted to push the boundaries a bit and just have some fun with it. And the 3 pieces show kind of the life cycle of these plants. The 2 plants, the pond lily and the water shield, have sort of a symbiotic relationship. They generally grow together in ponds and lakes in New Hampshire. And I did some research and realized I was looking at 2 different plants. So they playfully live together in the water. And I just wanted to follow that theme a bit with this. But my purpose really in designing it the way I did was to engage the viewer. I want you to think about, are you in the water looking at this? Are you getting wet? You in the canoe where I was and enjoying the plants? Or each of these was closely cropped, and you might have the feeling that you're looking through the glass of an aquarium to paintings. So it's a little bit not mainstream, it's more mainstream art perhaps. The design is more contemporary, but the details of it, I really wanted to show the color, the details, the texture, and it's the range of the life cycle of the plants. There are some examples of that very gelatinous roots and small leaves and flowers that are growing underwater. And when buds start to pop up above the water, but also when they are end of life, end stage decomposition, they just turn these brilliant colors. And it was the color that really attracted me to the pieces.
I think that was the thing that I was really attracted to, is the vibrancy of color that you can see in these works. And it's almost pushing them into the fantastical, but they're not. They are what we see in nature. But as a skilled artist, you've been able to come in and really give us these incredible variations in color and hue. One of my favorites, of course, is the mottling effect that you get on some of the older or turning pond leaves. It really kind of like shows the rigors of the season, because most plants are stoic organisms and they don't have the ability to run away from things, so they need to endure so much. And you can see in here that these may have been pummeled by hail. They could have been eaten by other types of aquatic herbivores. There's a whole range of different ways in which the plant has been damaged, but it's still surviving, and it's still incredibly beautiful. It's a stunning, I just love to see this as the triptych. You can really see that story in there. So absolutely beautifully done. Coming back to Asuka, because I know that we're almost coming up to question time, but I want to come up to Asuka. So I've asked each of you to do what I've done and choose a favorite from the show. So it's kind of like going, well, there's so many great artists and artworks in this show, but what are the ones that have piqued your interest? So we're going to start with Asuka. You've chosen this amazing study on vellum by Catherine Waters of the banana flower. Why did you choose this one?
The first of all, I have to say it was really, really tough choice. And I didn't get to see the actual works. The Cecilia and the kindly sent me the PDF file, but it was even more difficult to pick the one from the PDF file. But when I saw Kathleen's banana flower, I felt like I can hear the sound of the dry, the petal or skin, and it's a fragile. We all know if we touch those dry material, even just a small touch, everything fall apart. So those kind of feeling I can felt from her painting. And also Catherine always does something I wanted to do. So I was kind of jealous about it. So
It'd be great to ask her if this is one of the pieces that she had started whilst at the National Tropic Botanic Gardens in Kauai. Because, when we're there, we are absolutely like kids in a candy store. The breadth and depth of plant material that we can access is incredible. So it'd be really nice to work out if that was one of them. It's a stunning work. And it almost has a skeletal feel about it. It almost looks like a spine, doesn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. Lovely flow, beautiful movement. Well, thank you so much. How about you, Claudia? Who did you choose?
Well, I almost chose that same piece, Asuka, so I'm really glad you chose it because it's really stunning. I love it. And that stem, it looks like a spine with all those like vertebrae,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's totally stunning. I've been staring at that for days.
Yeah.
But I actually chose this other piece, Albina Heron's Butilon. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm kind of using the Spanish pronunciation here. But
that's correct. A Butilon, yep.
Thanks. So yeah, I chose this. I am just so enamored with the light in this piece. The way the light falls on the plant, and you have, the top of the plant that is almost overexposed, and the bottom is just, blending into the background, into the shadows, and there is so much mood. It's beautiful, and the composition is so graceful. I'm totally enamored with it. I love it.
Yeah, it's really lovely. I've always wanted to learn how to do black backgrounds. It's probably out of my remit, but it's incredible to just have that blackness or that emptiness, and then from that there's this image that emerges. It has almost like a still life or photographic fine art quality about it, but this is beautifully rendered in gouache, and it really has this. It's quite sobering, but it's still very beautiful at the same time. It's a really lovely piece. Fantastic. And how about you, Faye? Who did you choose?
I chose Abundance by Mary Dillon.
Ah, yes.
Say that this last weekend, I was lucky enough to visit the show in person, and it's just stunning to see them in person, larger than life, a lot of them. And Albina's work was spectacular as well. Really liked it and went back to it several times to just admire the lighting in it. But Mary's just checked off all of my boxes. It was the color, it was the detail, it was the texture of those really juicy seeds.
Yes.
And also the texture of the peel, the dried edge going around. And for me, it's the movement. My eye goes up and around, following the pulses. And then the surprise is waiting for that bottom fruit to drop.
Yeah. And we know it's going to stay there. It's going to get crispier and harder through winter. But no, this is a lovely piece. I'm completely biased when it comes to pomegranates. It's one of my motifs that I go back to again and again and again. So it's lovely to see different interpretations of the fruit. But one thing I love about this is that it shows gravity, and that's so important. So many of us take that element out of our paintings, and you don't get to feel the way the plant is growing, and you can really feel that this is a branch that's really been quite held down by these three fruit. And yeah, it's really well done. It's really, really lovely. Fantastic. So I think we're up to time, and I think we've got questions. Is that right, Gabrielle?
Yes, yeah, there are questions in the chat, and it looks like somebody put one in the Q&A function as well. Before we go to questions, I did want to mention that Mary Dillon's pomegranate piece won Best in Show in the competition. So good choice, Faye. So yeah, it looks like there's just a technical question for Asuka in the chat. May I ask what kind of brush you mentioned? Talons synthetic? Any? Can you say any more on that?
Sure. The name is Intalon. And the Japanese synthetic brush. Maybe John can say better. Maybe you can pronounce better. Maybe I can type here. Or
type, yes,
maybe,
yeah.
If you want to type it in the chat, yeah.
I think I have one. Interlon, the Interlon, there we go.
Okay.
So it's Interlon Japanese brush.
I'm not sure it was available online, but I mean, you can buy in US or some other, but that was the name. Okay. It could be, yeah, somewhere.
Nice.
It looks like there's a question in the chat for any of the artists. Was there a time in your art practice when you realized you needed help or insight with your technique? And if so, where or how did you seek help?
Well, experienced teachers at Wellesley really shared their knowledge, and that's been very helpful. But then at a certain point you say, okay, now I think I'm ready to fly, and I think I can work this out on my own, and we'll see how it goes.
I definitely have needed help. I need help every day. So I've had two mentors. One of them, as I said, is Elaine Searle, who has great programs online. And I also went to her workshop in Italy in 2018, and I highly recommend it. Not only is great for your technique and whatever, but it's super fun and beautiful, and the food is great. And then my mentor in the US is Sadie Valeri, who is not a botanical artist, but she has an incredible atelier program online, very affordable, very rigorous, not for the faint of heart. And I can guarantee you that if anyone does that seriously, your technique is gonna just skyrocket.
Fantastic.
Or maybe you can try and then make a mistake so many times. Sometimes you can make a bigger jump than you expected. It might be really hard if you think about it, but if you do, it could be easier. I'm not, yeah, it's just don't afraid making mess. So
happy mistakes. Isn't that what Bob Ross used to call them?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Another question, I think this one is directed toward Asuka, but others might have an opinion on this. How welcoming are insects in botanical art? Is it okay now to include accurate insects in your work?
To me, yes. But some people don't like insects, and I really understand. And it's like probably a phobia, or I myself has a really complicated relationship with the actual insect, because I feel like a little feel better. But it was really, really important in the ecosystem. The plants couldn't exist without insects. And then so those diversity is, I think it's really important.
I have been considering insects, and I have been collecting the like dead insects that come to die in my patio, and I actually have a little treasure here that I went to go ask.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah, it's definitely
beautiful.
in my to-do list at some
Yeah.
point.
I think, with insects, doing botanical, it's almost like a gateway to doing entomological art or insect art. You just get more engrossed in detail, function, and connectivity. So yeah, I think it's great to start to see those associated organisms included. So yeah.
There's a question for Claudia. Do you use spray fixative on your graphite works?
I don't because they change the values. So, you spend hours and hours and hours doing just the right values. And then if you spray it at the end, it's all going to change. So I don't, which is scary because it makes the piece very, very delicate. But I don't use them on graphite or on charcoals. No.
Okay. And this is just a comment about Faye's work. It's not really a question. Doris Shields says, I love Faye's water droplets. It really makes you understand that these plants are in water. That's really nice.
They're fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question in the Q&A function. This year's show seems to consist mainly of watercolors. Any reason? Is it a trend?
I think when we're presented with a body of work to select from, we're seeing the majority of work being presented as watercolor on paper, predominantly. If you have a look, there's quite a few graphite pieces in the show. I think there's probably more graphite pieces than in previous years. But it's interesting that with the greater exposure of this art form, we are seeing people starting to move into different media. There's, of course, acrylic, there's color pencil, and of course, oils as well. So I guess we're trying to encourage more and more ways in which this art form can be progressed into more of a movement. And yeah, it's great. We're finding a lot of contemporary artists now who are coming back to natural history as a site of reference, and they're doing amazing things. And it's great to actually see that diversity there. But I think historically, the works are watercolor on paper. But yeah, we'll probably start to see a bit more. I think in terms of judging, I don't know if works that have been rendered on computers or computer generated or digital artwork is actually accepted, or either is photography. But I mean, this may change, of course, in the future, depending on how that is progressed.
I did notice a lot of colored pencil at the show, and it's beautiful. It's very done.
There's one tempera work in the show, which is I found fascinating. It's a very old medium, right? There were a couple of people that wanted some like names typed into the chat. Like, please type the names of the teachers that Claudia mentioned into the chat. And then what was the atelier that Claudia mentioned? So if you don't mind, okay, I think we can probably, it's already 6:01, but maybe we can take one more question. So let's see. I have, as a budding botanical artist and aspiring scientific natural history illustrator, do you believe that this field of combined art and science will remain valuable in the many years to come? If so, how would you encourage others, especially the younger generation of us artists, to remain faithful in pursuing this field? That's a nice closing question.
Good one, yeah.
I'm going to say, again, I think reinforce the idea that anything we care about in life comes from an emotional connection. And to have an emotional connection, you have to have exposure. So I think for botanical art, is exposure to nature and exposure to botanical art as an outlet to show that love and that connection.
Follow your passion, your interests, and how they mesh together. Draw from your strengths, and just seek advice when you need it or you're floundering. But it's so enjoyable, and it will really help you lower your blood pressure.
I think naturally the younger generation, younger people are a little bit more attractive to those nature themed arts and compared to before. Maybe because of right now at this moment that our era, we were so we really have to think about that part really deeply. So I think it's not because I think it's really important to younger people join our kind of art, but I think we were playing a part of really important role, and then I think the younger generation will empathize. How can I say?
Yeah.
Okay, I will give the John later. I mean, you
Okay.
can just continue talking. Sorry.
I really think that, we live in such a fast-paced, dynamic environment now that this concept of analog in a digital world is really important. Learning how to do things hand-rendered is almost a lost art. When you think about, most people don't write anymore, they use tablets or other types of interfaces to communicate. And I think with the immediacy of a camera and the slow art that we do, a lot of people can really appreciate the fact that people have taken time out of their life to slow down and to focus on something so beautiful and something so ubiquitous and make it so attractive is really important. So we're becoming so separated from the natural world, and this is a way that we can reconnect.
Thank you so much. John, do you have any final words or thoughts before we wrap up?
I would just like to thank everyone for coming today. I'd like to thank my three panelists. They have done an amazing job with all of the questions I've thrown at them. And if you do have an opportunity to see these works in person, I do encourage you to go down to Wave Hill and spend some time really just observing and appreciating the work. And if you are so compelled to do so, I think acquiring one of these works would be worthwhile. Having these artworks in the universe is really important, but to actually own one and keep one for yourself, I think, is even more precious. So think about that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree that the exhibition is on view through December 30th. So you have a couple of weeks left to see it. The works are for sale, as John mentioned. So, it would be, if you want to take one home, let us know. And the exhibition catalog is also really beautiful. And those are for sale as well. So you could purchase one of those also. I would like to thank the panelists, Faye, Asuka, Claudia, and our moderator, John. Thank you all so much for this really fascinating discussion. It's really, as a contemporary art curator, this whole discussion was really eye-opening to me. I really, appreciate your giving your time and sharing your thoughts with us. And I would also like to thank the art staff at Wave Hill. I'm sorry I didn't introduce you before, but Rachel Gugelberger is our curator of visual arts. Hi, and Cecilia Liu is our curatorial assistant, and they've been behind the scenes organizing this panel, and yay, thank you so much. And Cecilia was put together the PowerPoint and ran the PowerPoint during the presentation. So I'd like to thank both of you. And last but not least, I'd like to thank the audience. Thank you all for joining us. We had a really incredible turnout. We had more than 100 attendees at this talk, which is really, really wonderful. So thank you all very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.